safety protocols. So that being said, we are ferociously working on distributing these vaccines. I'll just be honest, right now, we have the signups, we have the people ready to line up to get them, but the supply, we are short. And they, from the federal government, are assuring us that we will get those vaccinations, but it's going to take time. So I apologize to all of those who are either trying to sign up through the Athena site or trying to get with their own private doctors to get these vaccinations. They're going to be coming down, but right now we have more people in line than we have vaccinations that are ready to be distributed. The county is working hard to start to work on these super pod sites, but again, we're short on the vaccinations. So that is two areas we're working very hard on: reopening the economy when safe. And let me see if we have our guest speaker on yet.
Good morning, Assembly member.
There he is. All right, so before we begin with our superintendent, I want to just talk a little bit about him. I've had the opportunity to work with Superintendent Tony Thurmond as a legislator. We worked together on the assembly. I've also had the chance to work with him in committee. And in many ways, our roots come from the same, where way back when, and again, this ages me a little bit, but over 20 years ago, the state of California actually put forward a state grant called the Healthy Start Grant. And this Healthy Start Grant was meant to work with school districts and the community to bring forward resources in the community that were not necessarily tapped into. So an example is over 20 years ago, I became the Healthy Start coordinator for Fullerton School District. And one of the things we were able to do was partner with, for example, our Assistance League in Fullerton has always done eye exams. And we know that glasses for students are, in essence, critical. So those would be one of the partnering examples: uniforms for students, healthcare for students, signing families up for Healthy Start. That grant, in fact, has gone away, but the superintendent, before he left, that was very important to him and to myself. And before the pandemic, we were working on the idea of possibly bringing it back. So that is one of the things that I know that he's invested in, but I would also like to let you know a little bit about what he did. He was, let me get my notes right, sorry. Mr. Thurmond was an educator, a social worker, and a public school parent. He served the people of California for more than 10 years in elected office, and he also served on the Richmond City Council, West Contra Coast Unified School Board, and also in the California State Assembly, and he has represented his district, District 15. In addition to that, he attended Temple University, and he became the student body president. He went on to earn two dual master degrees in law and social policy, and has an MSW from Bryn Mawr, how do you say that? Bryn Mawr College, and has, of course, dedicated his life to education. So with that, his legislative record, he has authored legislation that expanded lunch programs, bilingual education, and also worked in higher education with college scholarship programs for foster youth. So with that, I'm proud and happy to introduce to you Superintendent Tony Thurmond, and I'd like to say welcome, Tony.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Quirk Silva. It's an honor. It always has been an honor to work closely with you on the programs that you described, like Healthy Start. And it's an honor to be on the Breakfast Club and to be in the 65th Assembly District, at least virtually. Good morning, everyone. You know, we know these are very tough times. I really believe that this is probably the toughest experience that most of us will go through in our lifetime. It is so sad that next month, more than 500,000 Americans will likely have passed away from the coronavirus. And so we find ourselves struggling literally for survival, literally to keep ourselves safe, to figure out ways to keep our schools open and safe, to support our small businesses and our large businesses. We know that this has wreaked economic havoc on so many in the 65th and all across the state and all across the nation. We have seen acts of blatant hate and racism and violence, from the killing of George Floyd to seeing white supremacists storm the Capitol to block the peaceful transfer of power. You know, this is a day that I did not think we would see, but this is where we are. And on top of all of that, many of our communities facing natural disasters, fire, threat from fire, having to balance power safety shutoffs. This pandemic has uncovered that this nation has allowed our students to go without the appropriate computing devices to close the digital divide. And Assemblywoman Quirk Silva is a champion for closing the digital divide. We've had many conversations back to our time together in the Assembly, and I appreciate your continuing to steward those concerns. During this task force, I created a task force to close the digital divide because we could see that we had 1 million students without a computer at home. And we've been able to move hundreds of thousands of computing devices to many of those students, but yet in the state, there are still 1 million students who do not have access to high-speed internet. And so these are the things that we must address. Obviously, we have to make sure that all of our students have access and our educators have access to personal protective equipment, the face masks that the Assemblywoman talked about. I have to give a shout out to all of our educators. I know Assemblywoman Quirk is a former teacher herself. I have to give a shout out to our educators for their hard work and leaning in, and our students, their resilience, our students and our families. We know that this has also taken a toll on the mental health of our students and everyone. Being isolated is devastating to everyone, and it means an increase in depression. Our office has worked with so many school districts to get them resources to do more mental health supports. We provided grants to school districts to address issues around hate and how do we use education to counter hate. We're providing grants to close equity gaps because we know that for some of our students, they're seeing a slide, additional learning gaps because they're disconnected. Those are largely students who haven't checked into school at all for whatever reason. Families are being evicted, people are losing their jobs, families have food insecurity. And so we literally are working with school districts across the state to call and try to locate students who have not checked in to get them reconnected, all while we're looking to the future. How do we create the environment for a broad and wide opening of schools? Many schools are open, some in the Assemblywoman's district and in your county. You know, we have to certainly commend those schools who found a way to stay open. But we know that for many, especially our larger districts like Anaheim or LA or San Diego, they're saying, hey, how are we supposed to open when the numbers from the surge are as high as they are? We have as many students as we do, and we don't have enough space to properly social distance. From my standpoint, the vaccine is everything. It's a game changer. The sooner that we can get the vaccine to everyone, especially our educators, the better. And that certainly creates the environment for our schools to be reopened, for our businesses to be reopened. But as the Assemblywoman pointed out, there are shortages in the vaccine that stem from the federal government. California just hasn't been given enough for our 40 million people. And so as we play catch up, one of the things that we can do is accelerate the amount of COVID testing that we can provide to our schools to open. You know, there's debate about it, but whether or not people like it or not, the governor has submitted a proposal that would provide $2 billion to schools to help them with reopening, the centerpiece of which is at more access to COVID testing. And this is something that I've worked with the governor on. This is something that we think is absolutely critical. Cannot do this without the ability to have more COVID testing. To put it in context, there are some districts in the state where they have projected that 1 out of 3 students comes to school positive for COVID with asymptomatic conditions. And so under those conditions, we cannot allow our schools to open. Many of our larger schools have literally closed because of high rates of COVID. And so obviously the vaccine is our way forward. In the meantime, if we can accelerate the amount of COVID testing and contact tracing and personal protective equipment that we can provide to our schools, it does create a pathway for us to get our schools open. We're working on that. It's not an easy task. I commend everyone. This is very difficult. I want to thank Assemblywoman Quirk Silva for her leadership, for your work with the legislature and the governor to provide schools, first $5.3 billion that they were able to use in the Learning Loss Mitigation Fund to buy computers and training for educators to help keep our students connected. And now there's another $2.1 billion, again, that the Assemblywoman and the legislature and the governor have provided to our districts to do things like training, to do things to offset learning gaps, to do things like support social emotional learning needs of our students. Even with all those resources, this is the biggest challenge that we face. And I believe that we have to stand together to shoulder this load, to find a way to move forward, to keep our students safe, to support our small business communities, and to preserve life as we move forward. I'll stop it there, and Assemblywoman, at any point, happy to answer any questions that you or any of your great constituents have for me.
We do have questions, and I will just make a few comments on your comments, and then we'll go through the questions that we have. First, as I started with the vaccine, we know that the rollout, even from the last 2 weeks, of the tiers and how people would get this vaccine continue to change. So some of the original intent was to make sure we, of course, had our healthcare workers, our public safety, and then there was a tiered approach. Once this came to be, we also learned that the best plans need to be altered. And with that, then came the idea that we were still not vaccinating enough. And then the over 65 number came. With that, we've also seen other issues, or if you want to say unintended consequences, meaning that some of our most vulnerable communities are still not being able to access that. So whether it's a drive-up site where some families don't drive, whether it's accessing computers and technologies to be able to get these appointments. We know that whether you're 80 years or above, maybe you don't have a computer. We also know that our vulnerable communities live in denser housing. They may live in multi-generational. So equity and equality, which we've talked a lot about in education, this is being questioned. You may have a 70-year-old that is still working on front lines, can't get the vaccination, and you might have a 65-year-old who has technology available and lives alone. So in essence, who would be more susceptible to getting the virus? Probably the person working. But all of these things are playing out in how the vaccine is distributed, and it certainly is a challenge. And again, with limited supplies, those commentaries are going to continue. I would tell those out there that are, in essence, hunting down a vaccine, persistence is important. Help those that you know that don't have access to technology, whether it's an aunt or uncle or somebody who you know has no ability to access, get online. But we are not in a perfect world as far as how this is being administrated. Secondly, one of the biggest, I would say, and I don't want to say complaints, but I would say it is complaints, and I've heard some really, I've seen some very powerful commentary on both sides, which is we know students do better when they're face-to-face. Bottom line. That's what we all want. We know technology is part of the toolkit to learn, but it certainly isn't the only way. And we know that our students are suffering without being in the classroom. But again, we have the whole issue of COVID, and we know that teachers have been infected and students have also. I guess one of the questions I will be throwing out to you, and I know it's on people's minds, is you have one district, just say District A, who is either doing the hybrid or completely open, and I'll put private schools in there as well. And then you have other districts that haven't been open since March and have no plans on coming back until maybe the fall. This is a huge issue as far as learning loss. And we also know that our students who are more disadvantaged are taking the brunt of this, as some of them are in, and I've seen it. My husband teaches online and has done the hybrid in Fullerton, and you can see them at the tables with 3 and 4 people, and you can see that it can be noisy, and you can see that they can't all move to a separate room. You can see that there isn't a parent there kind of guiding them. And I know one of his biggest issues is he has junior high, but just even getting them to turn on their cameras. For many of them, it's they're there, but are they really there? So I'm throwing that out as just a scenario. The other is, how are we tracking students in attendance? So this is the scenario. Again, junior high to high school, they have multiple periods. We know that they have homerooms and they can check in. Yet we don't know, does that count for attendance all day if they don't go to the rest of their classes? So it is a concern that they may be checking in homeroom. We're tracking them as they're there, but then they're not showing up for the remainder of their classes or barely there, which means they're not doing very much learning. So how do we make sure that we're noting if they're really there and engaged? So that's a second question. And then third is what you mentioned, the students that we have lost. If we want to say lost students, it's just unbearable to think that parents have had to make the decision to either say, I'm not going to send them to kindergarten because it's not mandatory, or we've moved 3 times, we're just going to sit the year out, or school districts don't know that maybe they've moved, but they're still in the school district because it's been hard to contact them. So what can be done, whether it's getting personnel to knock on doors? I know way in the past, we know that the promotorias, we know that the liaisons, we know that are very equipped to get out there because they have the language to speak to families. But how can we increase finding these students that we seem to not be able to account for? So those are 3 questions that I have, and then I'll let you ask those, and then we'll go through the series of questions we have.
Well, I'd start with your last question. We are working with districts on doing more of the family finding, and many of the districts already have located the students, but there are barriers to getting them reconnected. If they've been moving or someone's been evicted, we've actually uncovered a number of health issues that have prevented the families from helping some of their children. There are every challenge you can think of we are currently experiencing right now. And there are literally thousands of students who haven't checked in or are under engaged. And so we're promoting programs that we call family engagement, where there are folks who have experience helping students and families be connected to the schools. You can't tell a family that doesn't have a computer that if you need help getting the work to email us. There's got to be someone to call. There's got to be a way to do some outreach. And so family engagement is one of the most important things. And so we are working with our schools to strengthen their family engagement programs. It is a huge challenge. Our schools are taking attendance, but what we're finding is we know who the students are, but as I mentioned, there are those barriers. You asked about why some schools are open and some are not. You know, the variables are very different. You know, even just like if you look at the regional breakdowns, where even the ICU bed situation is very different, and it's difficult. People have been angry and they say, well, why has the lockdown been lifted in these counties but not other counties? And it's because in some counties the ICU bed capacity has been maintained or improved, whereas in most of Southern California there's almost no capacity. And so we're just seeing, it is sad, the level of infection that we're seeing. And then it is very sad, the actual level of deaths that we are seeing in many of our counties.
And I would jump in here just to note that in my district, Buena Park, Fullerton, and West Anaheim have been hit very hard by COVID and COVID deaths. The death numbers are far higher than other parts of the county. And it isn't just the cities. In Fullerton, we see the deaths in certain zip codes at a much higher level. So for example, it is not hard to understand if you're living in smaller, denser living and you're a frontline worker, you are exposed, and we are seeing 3 to 1 that the Latino community is being hit very, very hard. I will be honest, we have suffered in my family with more than a few members having COVID. Thank God they have recovered, but I have one niece who's only 28 who has lingering effects. So this is serious, but there is also the civic and local responsibility where the mixed messages of wearing masks, of are we going to follow the governor's executive orders of being open, not being open, people blatantly just disregarding public health orders, whether it be we're going to keep our restaurants open, we're going to keep our nail salons, our gyms. Believe it or not, there's even indoor sports like yoga and that are, I hate to tell people, not essential, that are staying open. So then when we say, well, we're tired of this, well, it's ruining our economy, who do we have to look at? And people don't really want to accept that. It's kind of, it's like, well, sorry, we're tired of being in. Well, being tired of being in versus having people die is a huge, there's nothing worse than having a family member die. I will just say, I know one of the trustees in Anaheim lost 2 brothers within an hour. I believe he's on, Billy Joel, and within an hour, who were in their 30s. And this is in our district, who died of COVID. So I'm not trying to be on the box here, but I am, because it's, you know, again, being the chair of the entertainment committee and saying, we want Disneyland open, we want Disneyland open, I do too. I want people back to work. But we got to follow basic steps to get where we want to be. All right. So, Superintendent, did you want to answer anything else there before we go into our questions? I would say we have our chat open, and if you and your district have found some best practices as far as finding and locating students, things that you were surprised because you were out there in the field, scenarios that you know, maybe you didn't expect. If you could put those to share, I think that's really important. And Joseph, you're on. Are you going to guide us with this? Joseph is my communication director.
Certainly. I will make sure that we're able to go through. So we did receive a number of questions, and we'd like to thank all of those who were able to submit their questions for Superintendent Thurmond and the Assemblywoman. This one comes in from Elizabeth Gonzalez. She is the Board of Trustee for the Centralia Elementary School District. She asks for Tony Thurmond, how can Governor Newsom consider reopening schools when in fact we have a daily increase in COVID-19 cases? And is it possible that we wait an additional 6 weeks to consider reopening schools with a target date at the end of March 2021?
Thank you for the question, Trustee. Obviously, you're right. There's hard to even think about schools opening when we're seeing the rate of infection that we are currently seeing all across the state and all across the nation. You know, having said that, I think every school district can set their own opening dates, and they have to check in with their local health department to see what the conditions are. We actually have parts of the state that are not in deep purple that find themselves able to open, and they coordinate and synchronize with the state public health department about when that happens. But your point is a valid one. And the reality of schools opening in February at this point, the ones that are not open, does not seem very likely because of the sheer amount of time it would take for schools to figure out how to get everyone tested. Let's face it, this is new to all of us. And so the idea that we are now testing adults and students and in some cases weekly, is a brand new experience. And the reality of that being able to take place by February is not likely. But nonetheless, we have to set the stage, provide the resources for how that opening might happen, and to work towards it as quickly as we can. I appreciate you, Madam Trustee. I appreciate all of the administrators and principals and coaches and staff and classified staff and others. This is a very difficult time. Let's continue working together to try to figure out how to do this safely moving forward.
And I would just add that there are some models out there where, of course, testing for teachers is already happening. I know Fullerton Elementary is already testing their students and have been back on the hybrid model, but in January has kept the students only on Zoom. So I do think there is something to say about not saying we're open or closed, but when I say closed, I mean online, but maybe having some flexibility. I know it is an incredibly difficult model to have teachers doing, if you want to say Zoom, and then with students in front of them. That is like being a magician, truly, because they have to be speaking to their students online, and then they have perhaps 15 kids in front of them. It's very, very difficult. But I think, again, having that flexibility to say we're going to almost evaluate as every 2 weeks, because the numbers are changing. There's a glimmer of hope in some of the Orange County numbers, and I say a glimmer, meaning the numbers seem to be stabling a tiny bit, but we had that hot weekend last weekend, and when I say hot weather weekend, I predict we're going to see some big spikes in the next 2 weeks, because there were so many people out, so many people lingering at restaurants across Orange County. And I do think we're going to see infection rates. There's also the Super Bowl weekend coming up. And these two, just like New Year's Eve and the holidays, is exactly where we saw those surges. So with that, okay, Joseph, more questions.
Yes. So knowing that we do have a number of superintendents on, as well as our teachers, and we thank you guys for being on, there were a few questions that were submitted. From what I understand, it is a federal mandate, but we are very concerned about the testing in virtual environments. What can we do as parents, board members, and district administrators to help with this issue?
The standardized testing, we are waiting to see what the new administration will provide. Many of us have called, myself included, have really called for a waiver around testing requirements, because I don't see how pressuring students in a high stakes test environment, when literally we cannot even get together in a classroom safely, I don't see how that's going to give us any real good measure of what our students have learned. And so the decision about whether or not there'll be a waiver ultimately comes from President Biden and his new designee, Dr. Miguel Cardona, to be the Secretary of Education. They will make those decisions. In the meantime, the State Board of Education in California and the Department of Education is taking every step to try and minimize the hardship that students will face and administrators will face if we have to administer the test. We've looked for ways to shorten the administration of the test. We recognize that there are students who still don't have computers if they're going to be doing remote. And so we're creating every option for schools and students, but we are also accelerating our call to the federal government for flexibility and to have a waiver. This forces us to find new ways to measure learning. And we know that high stakes testing is not the only way to measure learning. And so one of the things coming out of this experience is forcing our system to think about how else do we measure learning so that we get the best and brightest to support our best and brightest, our students.
And again, I'll add on to that. As a teacher myself, even before the pandemic, many times looking at the assessments that our students were taking and the ongoing testing, there is some truth that if you keep watching a student over and over and over and are measuring growth every week, you may not see it. But if you look over time, there are some very exceptional tests like iReady, where you're measuring their progress from where they started the school year to how they ended, versus these state tests that are actually measuring students against another. I mean, it's part of our goal as a teacher is to say, where does that student enter my classroom on day one, and where did they exit as far as their learning? And I think there's some really valuable testing and assessments that can take place, but I also am going to give it out to the teachers. They are doing this all the time. They're not state and national tests, but they're assessing all the time. And a good teacher is noting the progress their students are making or the progress the students are not making. So I really do hope there is an overall revaluing of how much testing is good compared to how much testing is too much, because it's like keep watering a plant and it's going to wilt, but take care of it and nurture it and it's going to grow. All right, Joseph.
Yes, this one comes in from our Westminster trustee, Area 2, Tina Gustin Garney. There's quite a few questions here, so I'm going to try to summarize and get as many out there to you, Superintendent. When can districts expect to get the funding sent from the December stimulus package? Will districts be told how much is coming? And will there be a delay in districts applying for extra money since February 1st is very close and districts must consult with unions and school boards in order to make sure that this goes forward? And for the Assemblywoman, is legislature expected to vote on this rollout?
Well, to the trustee, thanks for the question. We are in the process of determining what the amount would be for every school district based on the new federal stimulus. And I would just say that President Biden has really been very generous in what he's asking for California schools, upwards of $130 billion. And then another $35+ billion for higher education. And so we'll be working with each district to be clear on the amount. In the meantime, we're asking all the districts to spend down the $2.1 billion that they have from the CARES Act dollars to accelerate that spending. And if the trustee from the district wants to have any information about what's available, we can certainly work with them and their team to help them do that. The legislature, well, I'll let the Assemblywoman discuss it, but I know that the legislature still has to take a vote on the part of the governor's budget proposal that would accelerate spending the $2 billion package. I do not believe that's been calendared yet for a vote, but I'll let the Assemblywoman talk about that. And again, we're happy to work with any district that's trying to figure out how much they have left of their CARES Act dollars until we get the new money.
We do not have it on our calendar yet, but we expect some major votes to happen by the end of January, as we know that many are waiting in the wings to be able to determine their next steps, particularly on eviction, the eviction moratorium. We have some basic needs that have to be met, and that is, of course, the eviction moratorium, but also making a vote to get this funding moving forward, to get it into the school districts' hands, but especially to get it to the students. I mean, ultimately, the goal here is to do as much as possible to get the students. I do know just on a higher level, there are bills that are coming forward that are going to focus on broadband. If you can believe it, in our state of California, that is known for innovation in the Silicon Valley, we have areas like the Central Valley that there is just getting connected to device is not even an option. But there have been some creative partnerships where students are now going to community centers to do learning, partnering with trusted partners like the Y, like Boys and Girls Club, So we've seen some of those positive outcomes, but we have to get the very basics in place. Broadband is essential. And it's not just Central Valley. We have places, even in my district, where it's been very difficult for students to get online with multiple devices in a home. I bet a few of you have had that yourself. At one point at my house, we've had 5 people. And if the connection goes down, that's 5 people that are not either working or learning. So it's a serious concern. And okay, let's do 2 more, I think. And go ahead, Joseph.
Wonderful. That actually was a fantastic transition for us. So speaking about those who are in low income and struggling with getting the digital divide kind of bridged together, how can we make sure that we are able to reach out to our homeless community and the homeless students, whether it be throughout all of California, but especially in AD 65?
Well, we have, in our efforts to get more devices to students, we have prioritized foster youth and homeless students. And believe it or not, we've been able to move donations to those students. Often those students have to use those devices in community centers, but we have been able to make that a priority. We have literally pursued donations that have resulted in us getting hundreds of thousands of devices to our students. And if you have information about foster youth or homeless youth in any of the school districts in your area, Assemblywoman, please let us know. We will be happy to partner with you in pursuing new fundraising to make sure that those students.
Who would they contact in your office if there's a specific ask?
Well, digital divide at cde.ca.gov is the quickest way. I'm going to also ask one of our staff who's been brilliant in work to close the digital divide efforts. She has worked tirelessly. I'm going to ask her to contact your office, Assemblywoman Quirk Silva, just to follow up. She gets mad when I shout her out by name. She deserves to be shouted out by name. But then she says she gets 10,000 phone calls from people who know her. So I'm going to have her contact you. But anyone can send a note at digital divide at cde.ca.gov. And, again, if districts still have money left over, the learning loss mitigation funds were intended to $5.3 billion that the state provided for learning loss mitigation funds was exactly intended for this purpose, to purchase those computers for students who are homeless, foster youth, any student. If those dollars have been drawn down, then the remaining $2.1 billion in CARES Act dollars, and if those are drawn down, we will engage Assemblywoman Quirk Silva in new fundraising to help those individuals get the computers or the hotspots that they need.
And then just on that same topic, I know that it's not just the devices, but sometimes it's the hotspot, sometimes it's the connectivity. Initially, we had some of the service providers, Spectrum, others, AT&T, that were allowing families to have some plans that made it reasonable for them to stay connected. Can you direct us to anybody if families are still struggling with that?
Absolutely. We, through the task force on closing the digital divide, we made it a requirement for all the internet companies to provide low-cost internet. Many of them were doing it, but we needed it to go in a broader way. And so most families who qualify can get internet for as low as $10 a month. And what we asked them to do is to make it easier. We don't want hoops for families to jump through. We don't want people calling numbers and no one ever picks up. And so now every one of the internet providers has a liaison that you can refer families to, a number that someone's going to ask, someone who's a multilingual speaker who can speak to folks, who speak Spanish or other languages, to help them get connected, help them cut through the red tape to get connected. And we're not going to stop there. We're going to work with you and your colleagues on legislation this year that will help to create the infrastructure to expand broadband throughout our state. We know there are a lot of places that don't have it, and we need to make sure that our students get access to high-speed internet.
And could somebody from your team put that contact number on the service providers? I mean, not each one, but just a general place they could go to.
Absolutely. I'll ask our team. I don't know if it's one number. It's usually a contact per internet service provider, but we'll get some information together to help your office and anyone else, any of the districts who are looking for a contact at any of the internet service providers.
All right, so our last question, Joseph, I'll just jump in here on the question. We had a question from Teresa Hines, and it's related to AB 329. Before the pandemic, there was quite a bit of concern, I know in my district, from families or parents concerned about AB 329, which is sex education, or and if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, Assemblywoman, are you referring to what has become part of the curriculum going back to Assemblymember Weber's bill?
Yes.
Yeah, we received lots of an outpouring of folks with concern about the state requirements that are now in law to provide sex education to students. You know, I think there's also a lot of confusion, and I'd be happy just to say this to clarify. People ask, well, why would we be teaching sex education to elementary school students? And that is not what is in law. There is a requirement that students in middle school and high school would get access to sex education from the standpoint of keeping students informed so they make safe choices. There are ways to talk with students as young as early as elementary school about safe choices, but not promoting safe sex and not teaching sex ed. And so after that legislation was passed, the State Board of Education adopted a draft curriculum that would be used to help school districts create their own curriculum to be used. And so it is the law. We've been working with districts on how to implement that. The State Board did adopt probably at the end of 2019, a curriculum that is available to help school districts in crafting their own guides at the local level.
And I'll just add to that, because I did have many calls and even meetings with constituents and parents who showed up at other meetings of ours very concerned. So to clarify, each school district is responsible for how they implement and, as you said, what type of curriculum they use. But parents are also have the capacity to preview that curriculum, to sit in on classes that are related to this topic, and to they can also have their students not attend. The big I think clarifying point was is that they could not exempt their students from all classes. Is that right, or was it one section?
I'm trying to look at some old notes. I'll be honest, I haven't been refreshed on this. If I remember correctly, that the law created some, and I'm gonna ask my staff to send me something so I get this right before we close, that the law created some, what you might call options for families, but it did not create an option for school districts to just flat opt out. And so my staff is sending me some language right now to help refresh my memory, because I don't want to misquote this. This is an important issue. And we respect that families ultimately have the right to be the sort of guards and guides of what their children learn and know. Family members are first educators of children, and ultimately should talk with their children about whatever is in their traditions and their practices. The state simply has said that many students have found themselves in dangerous situations where they've been at high risk, and to provide better information so that they are informed, especially middle school and high school students. And so that's what the curriculum provides, an example for how school districts to come up with a local curriculum.
Right. And, you know, I didn't want to skip that question, because I want those out there to know that we take all of your questions seriously. And there's always subjects that cause dilemma for not only teachers, but for school boards. And we want to make sure that those questions are vetted. So with that, I do want to thank you. I have a few things that I'm going to just wrap up with. But before you leave, I have my own hashtag old school, hashtag new school. And for me, that means that there are some practices that I think, even though it's not as relevant now in the middle of a pandemic, but one of my favorite old school subjects is cursive writing. You're out there, wave your little hand if you think that, and why I think it is a new school issue is now more than ever when we look at our democracy and we look at historical facts. If kids cannot read letters from the past and they can't read our Constitution, and we say, well, it's a standard, but we know that some from not only school to school, but classroom to classroom, some kids are learning cursive and some aren't. So this is my big ask. We got to get cursive back because it's also shown to have benefits in therapeutic type of learning, particularly for kids with autism. So I know I couldn't get it through as a bill, but I really want you to, Governor Brown said that he would sign that bill, and actually went on a whole cursive writing lesson when we were sitting together. I still have the cards where he wrote his name and how his Catholic school teacher taught him how to write. So that's just my little pet peeve, cursive writing. Who wants cursive writing? Everybody raise your hand if you do.
I see some hand claps. I don't know if that's an announcement of another bill coming. I like old school, new school hashtag. You know, the other old school, new school thing, believe it or not, one of the things that's going to help us with students and closing those learning gaps is, like you said, first of all, teachers do a great job of assessing where students enter, like you said. And, you know, old school mentoring and tutoring programs actually do make a difference. You know, we probably need to provide a little more training right now to our tutoring. We had a great webinar yesterday. More than 1,000 educators participated on how do we close learning gaps. And one of the things pointed out by Dr. Linda Darling Hammond is our tutors should either be teachers or people who've worked with teachers or people who have training. And so, you know, I would also throw that out there. You know, riffing off of your old school, new school hashtag, I think that there's a place for tutoring and mentoring. I know it's made a difference in my life at every step of the way, including now. And I think it's going to be a big deal for how we support our students going forward.
Well, and there's nothing more important than a child knowing there's a cheerleader standing there by their side. So whether it's a parent, a relative, or school personnel, when all of us, I know for me, all of us knowing that somebody believes that you can do it and pushes you and doesn't allow you to give excuses and so forth. Those are the kind of things. And that is old school. We can have all the technology we want, but there's nothing more powerful than somebody calling up somebody and checking on them, a face-to-face conversation. And of course, with the pandemic, things have changed, but just think of your own circles, a relative that maybe you haven't talked to. My mom is 84 and we have to, of course, do all we can to quarantine, but we've made a decision, our family, as we just lost a brother. I've lost 3 brothers in the last handful of years. And we've made it a point in my family to just call her. You know, if she gets 3 or 4 calls a day, and those are really important things. All right, so I'm going to wrap up. We have some future things that are calendared, and we hope you'll take part in those. One that to me, it is coming up. Joseph, can you tell them on the COVID memorial?
Yes, so we will be hosting on Saturday, February 20th, a COVID memorial. We are going to be honoring the lives of those who have passed in Assembly District 65. We encourage those who are in 8065 to reach out to our office, as we will be creating an in memoriam recognition to honor those and the families who have lost loved ones due to COVID. This is in line of similar to what President Biden had hosted the night before his inauguration, and in the spirit of making sure that we are working together and coming together instead of being divided during these times, we are offering this to be a virtual event. So we will be hosting it at 5:30 p.m. Please keep an eye out on your emails as we will be sending out further information on our social media and e-alerts.
And again, if you know anybody who has lost somebody, I will tell you, in the 65th district, there have been well over 1,000 people who have died because of COVID. And we may be closer to 1,500 from our counts. Grieving during a COVID period, whether it's a loss of life because of COVID or any other reason, has been very difficult for families as gathering and so forth. So we invite you to that and invite you to share that, as we know for families, they are looking for support. Very quickly, I will continue to focus on homelessness and housing. Those are my top priorities. And this year we'll be looking to be asking for permission to be the select committee chair. I've already the select committee chair on Orange County chronic homelessness, but I want to add / mental health to that, as we know that some, not all, suffering with homelessness have mental health issues. We also know our adolescents are suffering. We know that now more than ever, with loss of sports and activities, depression is real. So those will be some of the top focuses for me. And then just to end, I was given permission by the California Assembly Speaker, Anthony Rendon, to host the first education caucus. And it is an unofficial caucus, but we will be meeting monthly to discuss trending issues that will be coming up for us legislatively. Like you, we face many votes. Some of you are school board members or superintendents, and a lot of times we'll get the votes in front of us, but we don't always have time to discuss. And so this will give us the opportunity as legislators to hear many voices and to really start to understand whether it's like the digital gap, learning loss, whether it's testing, all the trending issues, we will be covering that. And after going into my 7th year, I have decided that going back to my roots of education is really important. And so I will be hosting that. So if you have ideas or topics that you want us to discuss, please send those to us. And with that, we will try to get back to you on any questions we missed, and just let you know, please contact our office. Our field team is getting exceptional at handling EDD cases. We know that has been a disaster too with the fraud, but please, if we can help you, we want to. We can't, we don't have a wand, but we certainly want to do what we can to help. And I appreciate all of your time. So many of you are leading districts, are serving districts, our teachers, and we thank you. And we thank our superintendent, Tony Thurmond. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Take care.
Bye. Bye. This is my teacher. Bye.